Do you guys remember that game where you test your memory and eye coordination by watching a ball beneath a cup as the cups are being shuffled and switched around? And then by the end, you have to guess where the ball ends up. Well, I can make a correlation between that game and why a party switch narrative in the arena of American politics is so efficient, why it has been successful in the United States as far as convincing minorities that the party did switch. So the narrative is so easy to explore together that we can actually use candy. So let's start by addressing what switching is by definition. Switching means adopting one thing in place of another, changing the position, aisles, directions, or focus of something. So the blue side here represents the Democrats, who have never taken the appropriate credit for the racial terrorism of the KKK, segregation, Indian removal, slavery, civil rights opposition of the 60s, because they did, in fact, switch. They switched. By switching as a political tactic, notice it would require memory and eye coordination to discern that switching only means they changed positions without taking their crimes with them. So what did they do? They legit moved homes and didn't take the furniture with them. They switched houses and just claimed the furniture they left behind belonged to Republicans. So no matter how flawed Republicans are, they actually were framed. Democrats frame Republicans for being the racist party, while also inheriting the credit for civil rights and the abolishment of slavery. So to say the party switched may not be untrue. It takes memory and eye coordination to apply the fact that when you switch positions, you still must inherit the crimes you committed unless you project those crimes onto someone else. The bad news for America is, with this political strategy, it looks like those who employed this tactic were clever and evil enough to not only transfer their crimes to the party they claim to have switched with, they've also infiltrated civil rights movements to look like they weren't the true racists. This was a tactic to both begin subverting America, especially African Americans, and use the African American as a liability shield. That way, if you came against democracy, you came against the Negro who needs his liberation. By advancing a party switch narrative, the Democrat Party amassed the biggest microphones in media and culture. Their ideas dominated education. They poisoned the minds of Americans against their own constitution, and they subverted language so Americans would call their constitutional republic a democracy. The party switch narrative became such a strategic weapon that if you began to realize what was happening, you were called racist. That's why the party switch narrative is so efficient. It allows the bad guys to pose as allies. They can then indoctrinate the spaces they infiltrate with all the ideas they could not forward on their own. They knew how to use the black and brown agents in politics, right? Your Obamas, your Kamala Harrises. These people are handsome and charismatic, but they work for the establishment. And the establishment wants a democracy, which is a form of government where the voter has no real power, yet they think they do. And in democracy, the voter sends representatives into Congress or Senate seats to become an oligarchy, and then the oligarchy has the real power. The Constitution is the only thing that keeps an oligarchy and government restrained. But by perpetuating the party switch narrative as strategy, they've taught minorities to assault the Constitution. And on the back of that, the allies to minorities also assault the Constitution. Sprinkled in that demographic are the actual racists and fascists who use minorities and oppressed groups as liability shields. These groups were subverted and indoctrinated with education that grows the state while the Constitution is assaulted at the same time. All it took was a party switch narrative and associating the Constitution with white supremacy. This way, in the near future, nothing will keep government from wiping its butt with Americans. The strategy of perpetuating the party switch narrative is the most efficient operation in politics. In between time, Americans are conditioned to focus on representation, sexual orientation, genitalia, All this for progressivism and diversity, which are good things, only today it's a Trojan horse for evil doers. It's been weaponized. Americans are taught to be hyper-individualistic, so much that they can't suspect the racists in their party. And in extreme cases, they only suspect racism out of Republicans. And as the stakes rise, they become so hyper-individualistic, they're taught to deflect deeper inside themselves to the extent that they should question if they're in the right body. And then they begin to chop pieces of themselves off. And that, my friends, is also a psychological operation. Today, the plot thickens behind all of this political strategy business. I'm here to tell you that political strategy muddies all the water around us. Strategy is dumped on top of strategy, accumulating, growing. I'm here to tell you something. On top of a successful party switch narrative, enemies of America now hide within the Democratic, Republican, and Independent parties. So now you're dealing with wolves who know how to hide in plain sight, transfer blame, monopolize power, and they can take different names under different vehicles. So what can you do? You can stop voting for who Taylor Swift and Beyonce and Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion tell you to vote for. The rabbit hole runs so deep, you can't even imagine. Just know the enemies of America by their fruit. Know them by their subscriptions to socialism, Marxism, and communism, and how they champion democracy as they also remain hostile to a constitution.